Hey everyone, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host of Sales and Cigars. Today's episode is about podcasting. Have you ever thought about running a podcast? You ever thought about starting one? Think you got an idea, but you're not sure it's a good idea? Well, this episode's for you. My guest is Cameron Stack. He runs a company called, and I love the name, Podcast Sins. And we talk a little bit about why somebody should and shouldn't start a podcast. It's a lot of work. There's a difference between consistency and frequency. We get into some of the intangibles about running a podcast, what you want to do. But one big thread that came through here is to niche it down as far as we can to the smallest viable audience of people you want to talk to, and talk about one thing that really you can dig into and hopefully you have some passion for. It doesn't matter if it's fishing with a certain type of pole or for a certain type of fish, quilting, sales and cigars. It doesn't really matter. If you have a passion and it's something that you can dig into, there's an audience out there, and you can work with a certain person like Cameron Stack to help you build that audience. So go grab a cigar, grab a cocktail, strap in for another educational episode of Sales and Cigars. Thanks. Cameron, welcome to the program. I appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule to come on and have a chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm trying to remember. We had I always do a quick little interview, but I'm trying to remember how we connected. You reached out to me. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, so that was through the Podmatch platform. Yeah, that's how we got connected, and it can be a helpful resource for some of the podcasters out there, depending on who you're looking to connect with and stuff. But yeah,
that's what I thought. But giving a shout out to the folks over there. So let's jump in. The idea, I like to get a read on, is there a book that you read every year? Is there a book that you gift a lot, or one that you recommend to business owners?
Yeah, so I'm always trying to read new books and expand my horizons in terms of that. So there isn't a book that I read every year, but one of the books that had a huge impact on me was The Richest Man in Babylon. I read that around age 16, and it just really, opened my eyes to some of those insights and how you want to be thinking about business. And so, yeah, that book was just really game-changing. There's another one called The Slight Edge. There are a lot of great books I've read out there, but I would say that one was because I was reading that at an early age. I think that really did, change some of the ways I thought about business and finances and stuff like that.
Yeah, because it gets into finances. It gets into helping you build a business acumen.
Yeah,
I do a lot of work with salespeople, and when somebody doesn't have that ability to walk somebody through an ROI on their process, on their product, that is a book that I recommend that they go read, because it gives them a pretty high level overview of sort of the finance aspect of the business, as well as a bunch of other things. But it sort of gets them thinking about what a business owner is thinking about and what's important to them, and some of the vernacular that's important. So I haven't had somebody mention that book in a very long time. It's a good call.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your journey. I always make the cheesy joke about when we were 10 or 12 years old. I know I'm not doing what I thought I was going to be doing when I was 10 or 12 years old. How'd you get to running a business, helping people build podcasts and monetize?
Yeah, so that is a really interesting story. It's very, very long, but I'll give you the short version of it. And basically, I've always been fascinated with business. I wanted to do a variety of different things. But I started out in social media management, running social media consulting and management company back in the early days of Facebook. So this was like the early days when like Lay's potato chips, Red Bull had Facebook pages, but not much else. Apple did, you know. So it was really early days for business on Facebook. Obviously not early days for, users, but for business. So that's how I got started. I started creating content, creating meme pages, seeing how I could monetize and make money off these Facebook pages. And that just led me down a rabbit hole of like learning about content creation, learning about business, learning about social media. But at the end of the day, it is impossible to stand out within like just broadly social media because everyone thinks they can do it. Like they think their nephew who has a Snapchat can manage social media. And so it was really hard to stand out, even though I had worked with 100 plus clients, because everyone thinks social media is something that just anyone can do. And there's a lot that goes into managing, say, company's social media than your personal social media, like Aunt Annie's or some of these food franchises. Like they have whole teams dedicated to their social media. They don't just have someone who just graduated from college managing it. So I realized there wasn't a huge career path in terms of that. So I started pivoting and really exploring business and like thinking about different types of content strategies and like business models out there. And then I started a podcast called Unscripted Startups. So we really looked into like the untraditional path businesses, ones that are self-funded, bootstrapped, crowdfunded. And I just loved podcasting so much that I decided with that podcast that I wanted to be more involved in the podcast space. I was getting a degree in film and media arts, so it tied in perfectly. And so then I just naturally used my skills. And once I graduated, started offering production and consulting services.
So you followed a passion. You said you used the term going down a rabbit hole, but you really went in a direction. You realized it wasn't going to be something that social media management was going to be particularly challenging. So kind of pivoted, did a podcast, and then just kind of just followed that and created a business out of that. And there's a theme that I see with entrepreneurs, especially younger entrepreneurs, and I just turned 60, so I've got to consider anybody under 40 younger at this point. I used to consider 40 old, but that sort of changed as I ratcheted things up. But I just love this idea that you go after something that you really care about, that interests you, and you don't, it's almost like you're not working. Not every day is blissful and not every day is full of joy, but you're doing something that you're really excited about, you have passion for. So, and I see that more with younger folks. I have a daughter who's graduating college in a month, and she's been interviewing, looking at jobs and things, and I'm like, don't take a job that you hate. Don't take a job to take a job. Go find that thing that you really enjoy, and she's working through it. It's good. It's going to be, she's an equestrian and wants to run a rehab barn and such, but there's a niche that she likes. She's helping people take photographs and videos of their horses so they can sell them.
Yeah.
Right. But it's something that she really is interested in. So she's taken classes and learned about it, and she loves it. So why not try to figure out a way to make money and support yourself doing something you love? And that's what you've done. So,
yeah.
So the name of the business, I thought, I love it because it's sort of like this negative reverse It's a technique that I learned years ago in sales, but podcast sins, right? You're sort of implying that there's things that people do that, probably shouldn't do, that maybe not be the best idea. And I love that sort of little negative aspect to the name. Is that kind of what you were thinking when you named the business?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of things that that like people do right, but then there are also some very common mistakes that people continue to make that can sabotage their podcast. And so that was kind of the overarching thought behind the brand, is like, we help you so you can avoid these mistakes and you don't have to go down the rabbit hole and stuff. Like there are things that are simple, but you wouldn't know them unless you're really in the podcasting space, working with countless clients like I have, or other people in space. And that's not to say like that people who run their own podcasts are any less than that. It's just like there are a lot of complexities that come with podcasting. And so that's why a lot of people that I work with value our services, because they're able to weigh the opportunity cost and really realize that they are a genius in their space. So they're going to focus on that, and we can handle, the technical and some of the strategic stuff. So it's a perfect marriage. So people are spending their time in what they can do best. And, they don't have to focus on knowing all these hacks and all these tips to podcasting.
So you can help somebody soup to nuts. Like somebody's got this bright idea that they want to do a podcast about X, and you can help them create that, flesh that out, kind of put a brand together, and then walk all through all the technical stuffs, and then get them to be able to position themselves as they build a portfolio of episodes to monetize, maybe not the right word, but to leverage the platform to do other things. Is that fair? Is that a good description?
Yeah, absolutely. And leverage is a great word, because everyone has a different goal behind the podcast. And so we really create a tailored solution for them. And that's some of the DIY approaches out there. There are for, like generic paths for people to start a podcast. But we always want to think of it from a completely customized perspective. So no two podcasts are the same. No two missions or, goals for their show are the same. So the approach to building conception, launch, and growth of the show shouldn't be the same either. Some people want massive shows and mass appeal, and some people want, those very loyal audience, who are willing to do anything for them. And so we really build shows that are custom tailored to their needs on all facets, so that they can, leverage their thought leadership space, or they can leverage, selling a physical product, or they can get more opportunities within their space, or whatever their goal is. We help custom fit it to that, so that they can, understand what metrics they should be chasing after, what type of results they should be trying to reach, and really help them understand that, like, maybe you don't need 100,000 downloads. Maybe you just need 1,000 core fans. And so really tailoring it to that.
Yeah, it becomes, what is it you're trying to do, right? The community, trying to build a community that's going to support you, but you need to serve that community on a regular basis. I know my wife is into quilting, right? That's her thing that she likes to do. And every night before she, sort of her wind down deal, she'll watch usually a woman, not always, but usually a woman teaching them some technique that they're talking about. And and they're not all the same. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a ton of people doing that. I have a friend who does, she's into knitting. Okay.
Uh-huh.
This is like a 28, 29-year-old woman who makes 7 figures a year traveling around the world talking about knitting,
Yep.
selling patterns to, but she guests on podcasts, she goes around on stages. So is it fair to say that if you have an idea about something that you're passionate about, you're probably not the only one? Getting to that audience and sharing value is a reason somebody might talk to you and the podcast Sins team.
Yeah, so the thing I really love about podcasting is there's really nothing that is too niche. Everyone always is like, oh, that's too niche. I want to be more broad or whatever. I have not found example of something that is too niche. If there is a topic out there or an interest, there is a podcast for it, or there will be a podcast shortly. So take, for example, like the most niche sports you can think of. So like cornhole, like if you can think of like a hobby or a somewhat athletic sport, there is either a league for it or there is like content creators. But I love the cornhole example because no one thinks it's a real sport. But there is
they have it on ESPN late at.
Yeah, they have a professional league.
Yeah.
But like a lot of these things, people don't take them seriously because they're like, oh, it's a joke. Another one is Kanama or Yo-Yo, or like these are just within the hobby space. But if we go back to your example of quilting, there is a humongous town in Missouri, or well, not a humongous town, a small town in Missouri that has basically revived like this ghost town into like the Walt Disney or like the Disney World of the quilting community. So like this quilting company has kept the town alive and like employs everyone, and it's basically a tourist attraction for quilting enthusiasts. So like there are so many ways that like, first of all, business thrives within the niches, and also content. So if you can and provide value, and you know who you're delivering it to and who you aren't delivering the content for, then you'll be able to provide much more value than catering to everyone. I always say with podcasting, you want to be an inch wide and a mile deep, opposed to a mile wide and an inch deep, because you can always get more broad as you get a mass appeal. And this is something that you see common with content creators and podcasters. Once they start getting like 1 million, 2 million subscribers, then they become a little more broad. But you shouldn't be broad at the beginning. Or like business, you should really hone down on one product and really, become the industry standard for that thing, whether it's gardening, quilting, knitting, whatever that is. Then you can expand. But you should never start broad and then, because that's a lot harder to first target an audience and a community.
You don't know who you're talking to, and I think the thing that causes that trouble, whether it be podcasting or sales of a company trying to message their product to a particular audience, people are fearful of niching down to that. Seth Godin calls it the smallest viable audience, right? That might be 100 people, it might be 1,000 people, but it's not necessarily 1 million people.
Yeah.
There are businesses that need that kind of volume, but for most small businesses, they can handle a very small niche, and what they do is they confuse their audience by trying to be too many things, talking about multiple things. And I think that's really sound advice, not just with podcasting, but with business in general. Let's try to be as niche as possible. And so if we look at it, if we look at podcasting and somebody wants to talk about, like, so my theme is sales and cigars, right? Those are two of my passions. And sometimes it mixes, sometimes it doesn't. But my audience is usually an entrepreneur. They're usually male. Not always, but usually. They have some penchant for cigars, but they're growth-minded business owners. And the guests that I have on this podcast are usually tied to help people in that space learn something of value that they can try to go implement in their business or go implement in their life, one or the other. And as I've gone through this, I've tried to get in my business and in the podcast, I've tried to be more discerning. Is that something that you guys talk about with your clients, about trying to really get that tight little audience? And then, because this is my theory, tell me if I'm right or wrong. If you don't know who you're trying to reach, then your message will be off track. It won't get to where you need to go. You won't resonate with the right people. Hey, thanks for being part of Sales and Cigars. I wanted to share a new project that we just launched. I wrote a new book called Scale Your Sales. It's written for the CEO. It's a short, powerful book that explains the 7 critical mistakes that CEOs make with their sales organization. It provides actionable steps that you can take to fix those problems in your business today. And it might even help you get out of the sales seat yourself. So, appreciate you listening to Sales and Cigars. You can find this book on Amazon or wherever you buy books.
Yeah, I think that is completely true. You need to know who you aren't targeting just as much as you need to know who you are targeting. Because, yeah, people are so fearful of niching down. They're like, oh, well, what if no one listens? Or what if it's too niche or whatever? I've never heard of a case where someone is like too niche, whereas like there are countless podcasts. It depends on which platform you gauge it on, but around 4 million podcasts, and most of them died because they weren't seeing traction because they were way too broad. They wanted to be everything to everyone, and then they ended up being nothing to no one. You really want to niche down, have that core messaging align with those people that you are trying to target, because then they'll be your brand ambassadors and they'll share the podcast to other like minds. But if you are just like, I'm the Joe Rogan of pop culture, it's like everyone and their brother is trying to do that. You need to stand out, be like, I talk about tornadoes that come through, America, or, I talk about shark attacks or something. You have to be like very specific who you're targeting, why they should care, and really so that when people do find your content, they're like, oh, I resonate with that so much. Not like, oh, I just saw 10 other podcasts who talk about the exact same thing. It's like when you're starting out small, you don't have a lot of assets that you can rely on, but niching down and becoming an expert within a really specific space will allow you to open so many doors and opportunities that you wouldn't think is possible just by being that expert in said space. And it doesn't always have to be a professional space. It can be a hobby. It can be a craft. It can be food. But you need to be niche. At this point, like some of the popular podcasts, they got where they were because they were early days, or they had existing audiences, or other factors. But if you want to succeed in 2024, there's no way other than being very intentional about your messaging and being very niche. And there's a really great book on this. It's done by Pat Flynn. It's called 1,000 True Fans. And basically it talks about, like you can have a huge audience, but if none of them care, then what's the point? And to make that example, I did a talk about this, and basically the two examples, or there are a few examples but one of them was a TikToker with 1.6 million followers, I believe. And she had like her audience might have not been in the US or whatever, but she scheduled a meetup at the YouTube convention conference, and like no one showed up. And so like just because you have a big audience doesn't mean they're going to show up. Another example is someone with almost 3 million Instagram followers couldn't sell 36 t-shirts via her Instagram. So like you would think someone with 3 million followers on Instagram would have like could sell at least a couple hundred, but she wasn't able to. And obviously this isn't all her fault. It's just, you know, how we have been, you know, pushed to think that, oh, we need, you know, these high vanity metrics, and we need like countless onlookers, and we just need all this social praise. But in reality, it's like you want those intentional buyers. You want someone who, when you decide to put something up for sale, do a course offering, do something, that those people will jump and be like, you have provided me with so many insights, so much value. I want to support you. I want to share this. I want to talk about your podcast. And you really don't get that with these mainstream, you know, things unless you're a media publication, essentially, or have been in the space for countless years.
Which is what Rogan has done. He's just turned...
Yeah.
And there's only one of them, and we don't need 12.
Yes.
And so, you know, I think it's follow your passion, niche it down. Just like in business, right? The smallest viable audience that people really give a crap about what it is that you're doing, paying attention, you're speaking to them, you're resonating with them. I think that works across the board. So, I mean, if somebody's crazy enough to go start a podcast, right? Because it's a lot of work.
It is.
And I, you know, because I've had people like, you know, should I start a podcast? And I'm like, maybe. Are you ready to have, you know, put in a lot of work and a lot of time? Because what's the statistic? That, you know, they fail within 10, 15 episodes, that they don't continue on because people stop making episodes? Like, is that, what's the number that...
I don't recall the exact metric because it changes every so often with how many shows are coming out, but over 50% of people release less than 6 episodes. And then almost, I would say, I don't know the exact metric because obviously it's changed, but if you can make it past 20 episodes, you're doing way better than like 8 out of 10 people, 9 out of 10 people who start a podcast. It's all about consistency. Podcasting is definitely one of the hardest mediums out there, but also it's one of the most beneficial because you can control your audience. You're not beholden to algorithms on platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. But then it is a lot of work. It's long-term commitment. So it really depends on, you know, why are you doing this and what's the purpose behind it? Because like a lot of people are like, should I start a podcast or should I do Facebook ads? Obviously, those are completely different night and day. Like if you just want instant sales, then do Facebook ads. But if you want to cultivate a long-term audience who really cares about your community and you want to add value and you want to be known as someone within the space for the next 20 years, then start that podcast. But you're not going to see instant results like with a Facebook ad.
So what are like some of the intangibles that, you know, a podcast? I mean, we've got, by the time this airs, we'll have over 175 episodes, you know, that are out, produced, and in the world. So what are some of the intangibles that somebody can, let's just say they get to 100 episodes. Like, what is that? We've talked about some of them, but like what's some of the intangible benefits of running a podcast?
Yeah, so it really depends on the podcast and the space because the opportunities and things vary. But a good example is I helped someone within the niche sports space build a podcast. They were an unknown player. Basically, this community is very closed off. And they just basically started a podcast and said, we want to elevate your voice. We want to elevate your knowledge and expertise within the space. And this basically brought them to the table, quote unquote, of being someone within the space because they were just elevating other people's voices within the community. And they went from being like no one to being an actual brand that people all thought about and stuff within the space. And so that's like one of the intangible benefits is you can really brand yourself as a leader within the space by elevating people's voices and sharing their opinion. Obviously, this works a lot better in niche spaces. But then like you can get speaking opportunities, job offers. It depends on how you position it, but like in the podcast I started, Unscripted Startups, offered me so many intangible benefits, kickstarted my career, and I received speaking opportunities, podcast opportunities just from doing it. So like there are a lot of both tangible and intangible benefits that maybe you can't track with a ad pixel, but you know that they came from the podcast or that you know that they came from being putting yourself out there on the internet.
So I mean, one of the things that I've noticed, which speaks to what you just said, is it is much easier to become a guest on a podcast that when you have a podcast. I mean, you have to have something to say and you have to have some level of expertise and add value to an audience. But because you have some podcasting experience, you know, there's an assumption that you can deliver on your topic of your topic of choice or your topic of expertise. And I think, you know, that's almost more important than having a podcast, I think, is being able to to be on other people's. It's like, I explained this the other way to a guy. He's like, you know, he's like, I think I wanted to do a podcast. I'm like, it's like a boat. You want a friend with a boat. You want a good friend with a boat. And you get on the boat and go out and have fun, but you don't have to go to the gas station there, get at the marina and fill it up, and you don't have to maintain it. You don't have to pay insurance, right? You go out and guest on spots and have some fun and add value to people. Is that, I mean, I'm kind of tongue in cheek with that, but I don't think I'm wrong because it's an investment of time and resources to run a podcast.
Yeah, it definitely is. And depending on how niche your podcast is, you know, you have to be pretty selective about the process. So yeah, people with podcasts are more likely to interview other people with podcasts or other creators because they know that content creation is hard and you want to curate it and you want to actually be adding value. And in 2024, there are so many people who just want to come on podcasts, pitch their product, and not really add any value. There are countless PR agencies who have sprung up who just, you know, like pitch people like, I'll get you on a podcast. And people are inundated with these requests because I manage so many podcasts and like, it doesn't matter what type of podcast you are. If you have at least one episode published, you're going to get emails of like, can I come on your podcast? Can I come on your podcast? My CEO would be a great fit for you, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, this has happened to even like podcasts who have been like inactive for 2 years, or like you clearly know they don't review the podcast beforehand or listen to the episodes. So yeah, being a podcaster or some other type of content creator is like one of the levels that it's like, oh, I'm not 100% sure they'll deliver value, but I know they're not just one of these people who just wants to promote their service, because, that's one of the layers that you go through. With a lot of my clients, we do screening calls too to make sure, it's the right fit. And so there are other ways to go about it. It is very hard to get on a podcast of substance unless you do have something of value to offer. So whether you have a channel that you can promote it on, or you're an industry expert, so like say you've been in the medical field for 30 years, then you're not going to have a hard time getting on a podcast. But if you're just, the run-of-the-mill, med student with no audience, then yes, it would kind of be hard to get on it, because you have to add value. Especially with all the competition this year.
I added a 15-minute pre-interview, just for what you described. Make sure there's a fit. Here's my audience. Here's what they care about. What are we going to talk about that's going to add value to them? And that's after screening, people pretty carefully before we get there. And I probably, if I talk to 5 people in a pre-interview, there's probably 3 that make it through, and there's 2 that we pass on. And it's hard, but it's I don't want somebody just coming on pitching. I want somebody to add some value to help people.
Yeah.
So we've talked about podcasting at a very high level. We've talked about podcasting as to the value we can bring, the good, the bad of it. That it's hard work, that you can do it on your own, but it probably makes sense to get some help. And so if there's anybody in the audience, like my friend Greg, who's thinking about doing one, this is a valuable episode to them. So if we're going to have all of your contact info in our show notes, but what's the best way for somebody to reach out to Cameron and say, hey, you saw you on Sales and Cigars, or heard you on Sales and Cigars, and I'm kind of kicking this idea around, I'd love to chat. Like, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, the best way would just to be email me at hello@podcastsins.com. Obviously, I'm on social media and you can connect on LinkedIn, but the easiest way is just to reach out via email and be like, hey, I have this idea. Is it worth, starting a podcast? Because one of the things I really like to do with my clients is expectation management, because a lot of people have different ideas of what a podcast is. But in order for it to be worth my time and your time, we got to manage those expectations and help you realize, is it a good fit? Is it not a good fit? Because sometimes it isn't a good fit. I'm slightly biased. I love podcasting, but also if you're not going to be consistent with it, there's no point in getting started, because it's all about being consistent and it's all about that long-term investment. If you want to make money in business and you're committed to long-term, you would start a business. But if you just want a quick buck, there are other ways than starting a business to, turn a profit. So that's how I kind of think of it, is if you want something quick, social media is there, Facebook ads are there. But if you want a long-term committed audience and you want to develop deep ties within your niche or industry, then podcasting is the right move for you.
And you're going to help them think about all of the things that they need to do, the amount of what consistency means, because it doesn't mean doing one, 8 times a month. It could be twice a month. It could be, whatever the cadence is. But if you don't deliver on the cadence that you promise, you lose credibility. So, if you're thinking about a podcast and you think you have an idea, or you're not sure if you have, the resources or the time to put in, I would, recommend having a conversation with Cameron to figure out, he's gonna give you the straight scoop. It's hard work, but it's also a lot of fun. I mean, I started this because I wanted to meet interesting people and learn some things and just have a good time. And I've accomplished that each time I've learned something. I think it would be hard for me to go back and look at the episodes and find one that I didn't learn something. Maybe early on I had guests that didn't bring tons of value, but for the most part, I'm always learning something and I'm meeting interesting people and my network expands. So, we'll have all those notes in the show notes. So go reach out to Cameron. Last question, Cameron, relationship with cigars, past or present?
I don't really have a relationship to them.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. Some people don't find it as a hobby or a passion. So I appreciate it. All right, dude. I thank you for the time. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts and ideas, and hopefully this helps you find a couple of clients.
Yeah, absolutely. Because my two big passions are business and podcasting, so I'm pretty happy to chat about it because
it's what makes business fun. If we're doing something we love, we're not really working. Thanks, man.
Yeah.